Okay, so let's just jump right in. For all the buzz around AI, all the talk about more power, more data, it turns out the biggest problem we're facing might not be what you think. It's not about scale. The sources we're digging into today, they argue it's something way more fundamental. It's a problem of geometry. And that geometric problem, well, it leads us right to the big question, the mystery we're going to try and solve today. How is it that these super smart AIs, models trained on practically the entire internet, can be so confidently wrong? I mean, they don't just make a small error. They state something completely bonkers with total certainty. It's a real puzzle, and we're going to unpack it together. All right, so to get to the bottom of this, we first have to play doctor. We need to diagnose the flaw. And it turns out it all boils down to this really cool idea called the flat world problem. It's this core, flawed assumption that's basically hardwired into how these AIs are built from the ground up. And this right here, this slide nails the problem. On one side, you've got the AI's assumption that the world of ideas is flat, like a grid. You can just use simple, straight-line math to get from point A to point B. But that's not how reality works, is it? The real space of meaning is curved. It's complex. It has hills and valleys. So what the AI is doing, really, is trying to cram a round globe onto a flat piece of paper. And what happens when you do that? You get massive distortions, right? Things just don't line up. So you might be asking, well, how has the industry been dealing with this? For a long time, the motto has been pretty simple, almost a brute force approach. If it ain't working, just add more flops. And flops, that's just a fancy term for raw computing power, more calculations per second. But the thing is, just throwing more power at the problem doesn't fix that fundamental geometric mismatch. It's like trying to flatten out the map by pressing down harder. All you're really doing is papering over the cracks, and that leads to some very predictable ways these systems can fail. And what's so fascinating is that these failures, they aren't random glitches, no way. They are direct, predictable results of this flat world problem. They actually leave behind specific geometric signatures, like mathematical fingerprints. So a hallucination? That's what happens when the model gets lost in a totally flat, boring part of its own knowledge space. When it can't generalize to new data, that's like it getting stuck in a really narrow, steep valley it can't climb out of. And adversarial attacks, that brittleness we hear so much about, that's the AI trying to balance on a razor-thin saddle point. It's all geometry. Okay, so if the problem is geometric, it makes sense that the solution has to be geometric too, right? But to get there, to actually fix it, we need better tools. We need a new way of looking at the problem. And the sources here frame this beautifully as a tale of two lenses, one that lets you see the individual trees and another that lets you see the whole forest. So lens number one is something called the Hessian matrix. Now, don't worry about the name. Just think of it like a magnifying glass. It lets you zoom in on one tiny step in the AI's thought process and measure the local curvature right there. It tells you, is this specific step stable? It's great for seeing the trees, but it's totally blind to the bigger picture. That's where lens number two comes in, holonomy. This is your wide-angle lens. It doesn't look at one step. It looks at the entire journey the AI's reasoning takes. It asks, after this long chain of thought, did we end up back where we should be, or did we drift off into la la land? It's how we see the whole forest. And this quote just hits the nail on the head. It explains exactly why we need that forest view. Think about it. An AI can take a bunch of steps, and each individual step might seem perfectly logical and stable on its own. You check it with your magnifying glass, and it looks fine. But after 10 of those fine steps, the AI could be completely lost, talking absolute nonsense. It's like taking a walk in the woods. You can take 10 perfectly good steps north, then 10 east, then 10 south, then 10 west, and you might not end up back where you started if the ground is curved. Without that big picture view, you'd never even realize you're lost. So the big question is, how do you actually combine these two lenses, the local and the global view? Well, the solution proposed here is, frankly, it's brilliant. It's a framework to make the AI's reasoning process auditable, and they do it by, well, believe it or not, turning it into music. It boils down to this really clever 5-step process. First, you just take the AI's reasoning, its chain of thought. Then, at each important step, you use that magnifying glass, the Hessian, to check the local stability. Step 3 is where the magic happens. You use a special map to translate that geometric journey into the language of music, specifically the 12-dimensional circle of fifths. Now that it's music, you can check if the whole thing sounds, well, right. Does the musical phrase resolve? Is it coherent? And the output? You get a dashboard with all the data, and you get an actual audio file. You can literally listen to the AI think. Let's make this super concrete. Look at this example about defining justice. A good, coherent chain of thought might go from justice to law then to fairness, and back to justice. Musically, that would sound like a nice, pleasing chord progression. It would feel resolved. But now look at the hallucinating chain. It starts with justice, goes to law, but then it makes a weird jump to lawn, probably because they sound similar. That semantic leap is huge, and musically, it would sound like a wrong note. It would be jarring, dissonant. It sounds wrong for the simple reason that the logic is wrong. And this is the absolute key takeaway right here. The music isn't creating the error, it's just revealing it. Think of it like a stethoscope for the AI's mind. The doctor's stethoscope doesn't create the heart murmur, it just lets the doctor hear it. This musical map, this phi, takes a flaw that's totally invisible and abstract, hidden deep in the AI's geometric space, and it makes it audible. It lets us finally hear when the AI goes off key. Okay, so being able to audit the AI's internal geometry, that's a huge deal, a massive step forward. But hang on, because this actually opens the door to an even deeper, more profound idea. What if the goal isn't to find the one single perfect geometry for an AI? What if real intelligence is actually about something else entirely? What if it's about the ability to move smoothly between many different geometric viewpoints? And this brings us to this incredible concept called multi-metric diffusion. The core idea here is a real mind-bender. It says, forget about needing more and more data. The key to intelligence might not be seeing more, but seeing differently. It's about taking the exact same data, but looking at it through a whole series of different geometric lenses, one after the other. You don't just blend them all together. No, you create a pathway, a journey, through these different perspectives over time. And they have the data to back this up. It's pretty stunning, actually. So they took a standard data set, recognizing handwritten numbers. The best they could do with any single geometric lens was about 70% accuracy. Not bad. But when they created a path that moved through multiple lenses, one after another, the accuracy shot up to over 82%. That's not a small bump. That is a massive 11-point leap in performance. And it's not just on simple digits. They saw the exact same thing on a real-world medical dataset for breast cancer detection. The best single viewpoint got them to almost 86% accuracy. Pretty good. But by moving through different geometric interpretations, it jumped all the way up to nearly 93%. That's a 7% absolute gain. In medicine, an improvement like that isn't just profound. It can literally save lives. Okay, let's take a step back and put all the pieces together. We have these two huge ideas on the table. First, the idea of auditing an AI's thinking using geometry and music. And second, the idea that true intelligence comes from moving through different geometries. How do these connect? What's the grand unifying idea here? So here it is, the big takeaway. First, we've got to stop thinking of AI failures as just scaling problems. They're geometric problems deep down. Second, we now have the tools, the local and global lenses, to actually see and even hear these flaws. But the really big aha moment is this. Maybe true, robust intelligence isn't about finding one perfect map of the world. Maybe it's about the ability to fluidly switch between multiple maps, to constantly shift your perspective. And when you think about it, that's kind of what the attention heads in a transformer are doing. And, it might just be how our own brains work too. And that leaves us with one final, really provocative thought to chew on. What if we've been looking at intelligence all wrong? Maybe intelligence isn't about what you know, like a static library of facts in your head. Maybe it's about how you know. Maybe it's all about the journey, the dynamic, geometric path you take between all the different ways of seeing the world. Definitely something to think about.